So the question that we will be dealing with today is, why didn't Yosef call home? So in this week's parashat, in Vayigash, Yosef finally has the reunion with his father Jacob. Would anyone like to read the Hebrew or the English?
יאסור יוסף
Go ahead.
ויאסור יוסף מרכבתו, ויעל לקראת ישראל אביו גושנה, וירא אליו, ויפול על צוואריו, ויבק על צוואריו עוד. ויאמר ישראל אל יוסף, אמות הפעם, אחרי ראותי את פניך, כי עודך חי.
And would someone like the English?
I'll read. Joseph ordered his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. He presented himself to him, and embracing him around the neck, he wept on his neck a good while. Then Israel said to Yosef, "Now I can die, having seen for myself that you are still alive."
So we see this emotional, tearful reunion of father and son. But then we must ask the question, why did it take so long for this reunion to happen? Here's a picture by Jan de Bry, a 17th century Dutch painter. Once Yosef was anointed as viceroy of Egypt, he had the power to reach out and tell his father Jacob that he's alive. Maybe you could say, while as a slave, he didn't have the means to write a letter or send a messenger back to Eretz Canaan. But once he was given the power of being second in command in Egypt, why didn't he reach out? For all these years, his father Yaakov was in pain and sorrow over the thought that his son was no longer alive, and Yosef could have changed this. And this is exactly the Ramban's question. Would somebody like to read? I'll go ahead then. Even if it was his will to make his brothers suffer a little, how could he not have compassion on his aged father? How could he not send one letter to his father to inform him that he was alive and to comfort him? Because Egypt is only about a 6-day trip to Hebron. Respect for his father would have justified a year's journey. So, what do you think? What are your suggestions of why Yosef didn't immediately make contact?
Are you soliciting input?
Yeah, anyone just speak up.
All right, I'll start. It's Bill Eisenberg. He wasn't secure in his position because as a Hebrew and as Jews living in foreign lands, we're not secure in our position because historically we've been accused for not dual loyalty, but not sufficient loyalty to the land we're living in. In other words, he was just appointed. You brought out he was just appointed. So I'm saying he was not secure in his position from a political point of view.
That's an excellent point, that he still
had...
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, continue.
I agree with Bill.
Okay.
I have another thought, Joan, that maybe he thought that his father didn't care. In the past, the leaders of the Hebrew tribe had gone after people who were in trouble, and he didn't know that the brothers said he was killed. He didn't know what happened when the brothers went back and reported to the father. He might have thought that nobody cared.
That's an excellent point, Joan, and that's actually one of the answers that Rav Yoel Binun suggested, and we can actually, that will lead us right into that answer of what was his perspective. Right, like you said, Yosef didn't know that his father thought that he was dead. Yosef is asking himself, why isn't my father reaching out? And that leads us right into this video right here.
Answer to this question that I became aware of while reading an article in the very first issue of Migadim, the Israeli-based Tanakh journal. This issue contained an extended debate between Rav Yaakov Meidan and Rav Yoel Ben Nun, and I'm going to sketch out to you a piece of Rabbi Ben Nun's view on this, along with some of my own additional thoughts. Rabbi Ben Nun argues that to understand the answer to this question, you have to take a careful look at the Yosef story from the perspective of Yosef himself. One of the great challenges that face us whenever we read any story in the Bible is to understand that you, the reader, may know more than any individual person actually involved in the story. When you look at the Yosef story, the question you have to ask yourself is, what do you know that Yosef doesn't know? And how does that change the story once you realize Yosef doesn't know it? If you read the story of the sale of Yosef, you become aware that there is a crucial fact that is hidden to Yosef. It's impossible for him to know it because it takes place after he has been loaded onto the Ishmaelite caravan and is starting his journey to Egypt. And that fact is what the brothers did after Yosef was pulled out of the pit and loaded onto the caravan. What they did was they took a goat, they slaughtered it, put the blood on Yosef's coat, and sent it to their father, saying, Zot matzanu hakerna, this we found, recognize, please, is it your son's coat or not? Yosef doesn't know that that happened. He couldn't have known that it happened. He wasn't around for that. The question you have to ask yourself is, not knowing that that happened, not knowing about the bloody coat, how might that change Yosef's view of the story? Let's go through the events of the sale of Yosef and ask what the story looked like from his perspective. All Yosef knows is this. He was 17 years old, and he had these dreams. These dreams that seemed to portend that he would rise to a position of power. He told these dreams to his brothers, and they became jealous. And then he told the second dream, not only to his brothers, but to his father as well. Now his father had loved him, but for the very first time, Yaakov castigates Yosef. He doesn't like this dream. What does this dream mean with the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars all bowing down to you? We're all going to come bowing to you? And his father scolded him. He was angry at him. And then Yaakov sends him to Shechem to go check on his brothers. Shechem of all places. What's been happening in Shechem lately? Shimon and Levi and the rest of the brothers undertook a commando raid to rescue Dinah that resulted in the wholesale death of an entire town. Shechem is a place soaked in blood. Blood spilled by the brothers of Yosef. Now the brothers are angry, jealous of Yosef. They see him as a threat. Why don't you go check on your brothers in Shechem, Yaakov tells Yosef. Yosef sees it's dangerous. His answer, Hineni, here I am. Hineni is one of those words in the book of Genesis. What does Hineni remind you of? Who else said Hineni? The famous Hineni in the book of Genesis. The Hineni of Avram to God in the story of the binding of Isaac. With that Hineni, doom was right around the corner for Yitzchak. With Yosef's Hineni, does Yosef realize that doom is right around the corner? I agreed. I went to Shechem. I said Hineni to you. I trusted that everything would be fine. But everything wasn't fine. My brothers jumped me, stripped me of my clothes, threw me in the pit, sold me off to Egypt. That's what Yosef knows. And now what doesn't he know? Tragically, he doesn't know that the brothers brought the bloody coat to father, tricking father into thinking Yosef was dead. So from Yosef's perspective, what does he think happened next? For all he knows, maybe they came back to father, said father, it was him or us. Maybe father himself saw Yosef as a threat. It's not like nobody had ever been kicked out of the family before. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yishmael. Avram wanted to keep Yishmael around. Sarah didn't think it was a good idea. God sided with Sarah. That was the end of Yishmael. Yaakov and Esav. Esav got expelled from the family. I'm down. I'm languishing in Egypt year after year. There was never any search party. Maybe I was kicked out of the family. Indeed, Rav Yoel Ben Nun points out, look at the names that Yosef gives to his two children, Manasseh and Ephraim. Menashe, the verse says, Ki nashani Elokim mikol amalim mikol beit avi. God has allowed me to forget all of my toil, all of my travail in my father's house. Ephraim, ki ifrani Elokim be'eretz anyi. God has allowed me to become fruitful, to have all these children in the land of my oppression. Yosef building a new life, leaving his old life behind. He'll still be a God-fearing Jew, but what of his ties with his family? Does Yosef think he's been thrown out, that it's all over? If you adopt this perspective, it changes the way you look at the Yosef story. It changes the way you look at Yosef and perhaps his relationship with Paro, with Pharaoh. Pharaoh pulls him out of the pit, this dungeon that he was in. Says, I hear you know how to interpret dreams. Could you interpret my dream? Gives him new clothes, beautiful new clothes. Sets him up again as second in charge. Everything that Yosef would have wanted, perhaps, from his own father. Where were you when I was in the pit? Here's a man who takes me out of a pit. Where were you when I was stripped of my clothes? Here's a man who gives him new clothes. I didn't like your dream. Here's a man who wants to tell Yosef dreams and to hear his interpretation. Paro gives Yosef a wife, gives him a new name. What kind of man gives you a new name, gives you a wife? A father kind of man. The challenge that faces Yosef. Where does your loyalty lie now? Who's your real father? And it's all very fine for Yosef to remain close to Pharaoh now, while Yaakov is back still in Canaan. But what if Yaakov should ever be reunited with Yosef, with Pharaoh still in the background? That, I believe, sets up the real climax of the Yosef story that takes place in Parashat Vayigash. But we'll have to wait till Parashat Vayigash to talk about it. I'll see you then.
So that was right. That is, Joan, really your answer that Yosef thought his father didn't care about him, so he wouldn't reach out. Maybe there's anger or confusion, right? Does anybody else have any other suggestions?
You know, there's another side to that, and that is that, you know, Bill had brought up the idea of the dual loyalty. But if we follow what we just, well, I couldn't see it because I'm driving, but heard with Rabbi Foreman that perhaps Yosef is afraid of Paro at this point because he has been treated as an adopted son, which means that Paro would be jealous of the real father had he reached out, and we don't want a jealous Paro.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But Natalie, he could have reached out when he was head of Potiphar's household. He had the physical means to send. I don't know what they did then. Send a camel with a note. I mean, I don't know how they
Yeah.
got messages, but I'm sure that there were ways to send the message, and he didn't do it. He was a slave, and yet he had power. He had enough power that he could have written a note.
And that could go back to the idea of plain fear, you know, what Bill had started with, that, you know, if he would act this way, I mean, everything that happened to him from his brothers on basically could turn on a dime. You know, he could, you know, he was cast out, and then the stuff that happened to him in Egypt was not exactly nice until he became the viceroy. So maybe he was just plain afraid.
Yeah, both excellent points. And so now we'll also look at the answer of the Ramban. So the Ramban says that Yosef was following destiny. If we look, and he had to follow what the dreams that he had. He could only act in the way of fulfilling his dreams. And that these dreams are a reflection of God's plan, and he's obligated to bring them to fruition. Remember, what were the two dreams? It was
the bowing down and the famine.
Yeah, right. The sheaves of wheat bowing down, and the stars bowing down.
Yeah.
So the sheaves of wheat bowing down represented the brothers. All the brothers had to bow down, and the stars is that also Yaakov and Yaakov would bow down. So he had to wait until this dream happened, the first dream of all the sheaves of wheat bowing down, all the brothers bowing down, and only then could he contact his father to come and fulfill the second dream. Now, you could ask, well, why couldn't he, once he was the viceroy in Egypt, he would invite his brothers down, and then they would all bow down, and then his father would come down. He didn't have to. Why did he have to wait still? So the Ramban says that the sheaves of wheat represent food, and that they had to come asking for food, and Yosef would be sustaining them. And that is also an integral part of the dream. That's why I had to be in the situation of still waiting for them to come down like that.
I think the Ramban is making a valid point, because today we think of dreams as filled with nonsense, but in that world, all the dreams so far had been fulfilled exactly like they were. Like he had the dream of the butler and the baker, and that turned out exactly right as the dream said. Then there was Pharaoh's dream, and then, again, that turned out exactly the way he interpreted them. So in his worldview, dreams must be fulfilled exactly like they are supposed to be carried out exactly the way they are, not like today. Later, the Talmud says the dreams are filled with noise and nonsense. But what he sees so far is that all dreams actually materialize exactly the way they are. So that makes sense that he feels that he needs to have that dream with the bowing down be realized.
Yeah. So yeah, so what do you think about that answer, and does it justify waiting so long?
Well, if you think in terms of his brothers, I know that if I had brothers who treated me in that kind of abominable way, I would be fine never seeing them again. And the last words he had with his father were difficult words. So he might have thought that his father was in on this whole thing. So if you think like that, so he didn't want to have anything to do with his birth family until he saw them.
And that part, him seeing them, kind of reminded him of all those feelings, and maybe of feelings of warmth.
I'll put another spin on it, and it reminds me of how Yaakov was so afraid to meet his brother. Yosef didn't, he was not very nice to his brothers. Can't excuse what the brothers ultimately did, but he was arrogant and insensitive and yada yada. He may have had a lot of guilt, and when you have guilt, you don't necessarily reach out at that point. It really reminds me of Yaakov saying, hey, or projecting that Esau was going to kill him.
Yeah, excellent point. And that there was all that tension there. So
can I make a suggestion? Maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe he thought, I'll send a message, but he procrastinated I know when I have an unpleasant task, I just keep putting it off.
And then you get embarrassed.
Right. Then it's so long already. So, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually mentioned, we have a cousin, his name is Jonathan Kedem in Jerusalem. I happened to speak to him today, and I told him about your class that you're giving and the question that you're going to pose. And I asked him what did he think about it, and he said very simply, he said that he just forgot about his father. You know, natural thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Wow.
that point is actually even suggested by the name that he gives to his sons, which a foreman mentioned in the story. Right? What is the name that he gives his first son, Menashe? And what is the reason that the Torah says? God has made me forget my parental home. So that I think really does suggest that supports what you're suggesting, that he forgot about his father.
But he didn't forget his father. He didn't forget his parental home, because the name that he gave his son said, God has made me forget my parental home. In other words, I remember it, but it's painful for me, and I'm trying to put it aside. He remembered it, or he wouldn't have given his son this name that means this long sentence. So that's what I think. And it all started because a parent showed favoritism. When you show favoritism as a parent, and if you have more than one child and one is raised up and the others are not, I'm not saying that they're going to put the kid in the pit, but I am going to say that they do not have warm and fuzzy thoughts about that kid.
That's working.
Can you hear us? Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you. Can you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, the comment I was going to make is that if Joseph is just a instrument of God doing whatever he is doing is not because he wants to, but because he's following God's command, then think of Rebecca when she has this history that everybody says she manipulated, but God told her that her youngest son will be the main son, not the oldest one, and that's exactly what she was doing.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah.
So maybe we have that precedent of following God's plan. So we have these many different answers that we've suggested. Maybe he didn't have the position. He really, even he was a viceroy, he didn't have the full power. He was still subordinate to Pharaoh, and there's a dual loyalty, or he's scared of Pharaoh, or there's the idea that he's angry at his father, and really his father should be looking for him, or he's procrastinating. So there's all these different gray ideas, and there's one more final answer I'd like to suggest. That is Nechama Leibowitz's answer, the Bible commentator, a great aunt. She suggests that Yosef wanted to give the brothers an opportunity to do tshuva, and full tshuva. So she brings Maimonides' definition of full tshuva. Would anyone like to read?
One who reached complete
Or go ahead.
teshuva, a person who confronts the same situation in which he sinned when he had the potential to commit the sin again, and nevertheless abstains and does not commit it because of his teshuva alone, and not because of fear or lack of strength.
Right, so that's the definition, that you are presented with the same situation and you don't do the sin. So now let's ask, what was the brothers' sin?
Sold their brother.
Right, exactly, right? They sold Yosef, they abandoned him, they sold him. So
they
then
did not sell him.
But how about jealousy? That's their That's the motivating force.
Right, that's the motivating
That all
force.
goes back to their father.
But what did they actually do to Yosef? Or from his perspective, like Reformant says, they abandoned him. So then, what does Yehuda do in our parashat when Yosef tells the brothers that Benjamin is gonna stay here with me, and I'll keep him captive?
Hostage.
He does that. He shows the total commitment. He says, take me as a slave, but don't take Benjamin.
Exactly, right? Ve'ata, this is what Yehuda approaches Yosef and says, Ve'ata yeshev na avdecha tachat hanal eved la'adoni ve'anal yal imechav. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. In the same exact situation, Yehuda and the brothers do the tshuva and don't abandon their brother and really give them. Yehuda's giving himself over. He's saying, I will be the one to remain, but let Benjamin go back. And that's the tshuva of caring for their brother and not abandoning.
But I don't think it's because they were sorry for what they actually did to Joseph. I think they were very worried about what the loss of Benjamin would do to their father. That would kill him altogether, because they almost killed him with their story about Joseph.
That's a good point. Really, maybe it's not one of the things that Maimonides says is that it's not because of fear or a lack of strength. And you're saying really it is fear. They do have fear of their father.
Fear for their father.
Or fear for their father. So maybe you could say that that's a good point. It's a very good point. So right, we have this idea of tshuva, and that in itself, giving a second chance, is something worth Yosef waiting. But I think there's also something deeper. Why was it so essential for the brothers to do tshuva in Yosef's mind? Right? Why did he want them to do tshuva so badly? Because if he's thinking about his great grandfather and his grandfather, what did those brotherly conflicts end up happening? Right? With Ishmael and Yitzchak, Yitzchak was the one to continue the covenant, and Ishmael was excluded from the family, and Yaakov and Esav was excluded for the family. So Yosef maybe saw it so important maybe Yosef saw, because of the brothers' sin of they might be excluded from the family. So really it was important for him to keep the family united. And he wanted to correct the mistakes of his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather, who caused all this strife and favoritism, right? Joan, as you said, this horrible sin of favoritism. Joseph wants to correct that and say, we're not going to let favoritism divide our family. We're going to be one united family. And by giving them the opportunity to do tshuva and correct their mistake, Yosef is saying all the 12 sons of Jacob will be included in the people of Israel. So that's the shiur, and if anyone has anything else to say or to add, feel free to speak up.
Yasher koach,
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed.
Did a lot of research, Neve. Thank you.
Yep.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neve. Thank you.
Well,
Great
yeah.
job.
Good job.
Great job.
Yofi.
Thanks, Nate.
Nice. Presented very, very nicely and clearly.
Original.
we're gonna give you a new name, Neve. We're gonna call you Malamed. Malamed.
Rabbi,
There
Rabbi.
you go.
Well, not quite. He's getting toward Rebbe, not quite. And then Malamed, we'll start him out with Malamed. All right.
Thank you.
Mushka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.